Let's bring in Sharyl Attkisson. I've known her for a long time. She's an excellent reporter. She's coming to us from Leesburg, Virginia. Her new book, as I mentioned, just out, Slanted: How the News Media Taught Us to Love Censorship and Hate Journalism. Wow. Sharyl also hosts a Sunday TV program, Full Measure, on Sinclair Television. Okay, so were you surprised that the press, the corporate media, almost 100% of it, outside of Fox, refused to even consider there might be fraud in this election? Were you surprised about that?
I guess I was surprised at the extent to which they displayed the lack of rational journalistic curiosity and skepticism. I thought there might be at least a little more, but then looking back, I guess maybe we shouldn't be surprised, because after they were so wrong in 2016, the media promised to self-correct and reflect, but they seemed to just double down, and they went full-fledged into the 2020 campaign doing the same thing. And I think they've continued along that track post-election.
Okay, but not only have they not investigated anything, they marginalize people who do want investigations. They demonize them, isolate them, and treat them with disrespect. So if you were to go on CNN or MSNBC or the Today Show or Good Morning America, Sharyl, for your book, and I don't know whether you're going on those places, and you said in the course of a conversation, I think you guys might want to look into these allegations of fraud. They would laugh at you. They would scorn you. So it's an activism to keep these allegations under wrap. That takes it a step farther, does it not?
It does. And that's one of the things I've studied and talked about. You talk about seeing changes at CBS News, as I did. At CNN, I worked at CNN back when it was a news organization. There's a lot of talk about that in the book with current and former insiders, speaking to the devolution of news, really at all these news organizations, where they have crossed over and redefined their role as journalists, as you know, no longer reporting what's happening on the ground, giving various views, reflecting the facts. They're simply there to produce the narrative, to convince you what to think, to keep off certain viewpoints that counter the powerful interests that they're serving, and to controversialize those who aren't on point with the narrative that they're there to further. It's really quite shocking to hear journalists make proclamations such as the day after the election that Trump should give it up and he's not being patriotic and there's nothing to see and so on. These are things that would never have been uttered by legitimate news organizations, maybe by analysts, but not by the reporters 10, 15 years ago. But now it's commonplace. They're rewarded for giving these viewpoints and pushing them. And it's pretty much all you see when you turn on TV or read these mainstream news articles.
In the chapter in Smear about the New York Times, you write, the press is no longer seeking information. It wants a narrative to shape public opinion. So it doesn't want the facts. It wants to demonize whoever it may be. And I was subjected to that for more than 20 years myself, so I know it's true. But the question that everybody asks me is why? So when I worked at CBS under Dan Rather, there was bias, but there were also standards that you had to adhere to, as you just said. If I had gone on after an election and said, all right, hey, any allegations of fraud, we're not even going to take a look at them. Nah, anybody who thinks that's a nut, I would have been fired. All right, I couldn't do that. Now you can. Why did that happen?
Well, I tried to talk about this slow creep over the years in Stonewalled and The Smear and now Slanted. For the first 2 decades of this century, political and corporate interests, in my view, figured out how to get their nose under the tent and news organizations and dictate through influence and connections and nonprofits and propaganda what we do and don't talk about, the terms we use, the narratives we forward. But then they saw people were still independently making up their own minds. And most frighteningly to these interests and to the media, they are one and the same. In 2016, nonetheless, Donald Trump got elected when the people were told not to elect him and all the reasons not to. So they almost went into a panic mode and realized, hey, we kind of control the news, the terms of how things are reported, but people are still getting unfettered access online. So they moved in a very organized way, in my view, in a very concerted way, starting in 2016 to figure out how to control the internet information landscape, social media, Google, all of the things we're talking about today. And they had to do that, Bill, by first convincing us that there's a market for it, that we needed our information to be curated and culled through. So we would invite these third parties to come in and get between us and our information, thus affording them the opportunity to do exactly what they've done and slant and smear and censor. And that's where we are today. I think it's the same interests that have been shaping the news now stepping in and working very hard to make sure we don't make up our own minds by seeing the things we want to see on the internet.
There's also a financial aspect in this. So when I took over a primetime spot on the Fox News channel and stayed there for more than 20 years, I made the News Corporation, which is the corporation that runs Fox News, billions of dollars with a B. All right? I made them that money because my program was so successful, it drove a lot of the other programs on that network. They all saw that. Disney saw it, Viacom saw it, that's CBS, all right? Comcast saw it, NBC. In fact, Comcast tried to hire me and offered me big dollars to go over there. They saw what I did, which was opinion journalism, and we made no pretense, but it was fact-based opinion. All my opinions were based on facts, not conspiracies or anything like that, which they do today. So the profit margin became so high to be ideological, either conservative or liberal, that, in my opinion, is what happened. That was driving all of this. Am I wrong?
Well, that's no doubt a factor, but I think what it did was open the door for these interests that were already working so hard and quite successfully to control the news in more subtle ways. It opened the door in another avenue for them to come in a more heavy-handed way and control the news. And as you probably know, there's a whole industry that trains analysts, pundits, and reporters in a very partisan way, but then sends them out to news organizations where they're either contributors or they're even hired in the newsrooms. And all they're doing is furthering propaganda. And in this environment that you described, they are welcome to, even as news reporters, put their opinions in there and put their talking points and propaganda out as if it's news, drowning out really the idea that there are neutral facts and two sides. And in fact, one of the most important accomplishments they do, these propagandists, is make sure certain people and views and scientific studies go down the memory hole and are never seen in places where people would normally see them or want to hear them. They don't even exist.
That's what the big internet companies in Silicon Valley are doing. Google and Twitter and all that. If you put something up and they don't like it, then they take it down. And that's becoming a huge problem as well. What about the country club factor? You are a long-time Washington, D.C. person. I'm a New York person. We both know people in Los Angeles in the entertainment industry. It's a mindset of liberalism in all three places. There's no question about that, all right? Cocktail party circuit, invitations to parties, invitations to openings, to the Kennedy Center honors, all of that centers around a liberal social world. How powerful is that in the presentation of the news?
Well, that definitely impacts what you see and why there aren't more independent voices in journalism today, for example, in Washington, D.C., going into the newsrooms and saying, what are we doing? You know, shouldn't somebody be looking at other views or investigating these obvious questions we should be looking at? It's because when they do the opposite, when they squelch those views or when they ask questions a certain way, perhaps interviewing President Trump, and they conduct the interview with a certain lack of decorum or journalistic even standards or integrity, but they're patted on the back for that. They finish the interview and they're told by their bosses and their colleagues, and I suppose at the parties, what a great job they did. So it feeds upon itself. And there's nobody standing up and saying, this is wrong. We should provide alternatives as well.
Bill O'Reilly is back on TV and only on The First. No Spin News, every weeknight at 8 p.m. Eastern, only on The First.